International Soccer Preview. We are Soccer Files Canada. Welcome to our continuation of Series 19. This one looking at the players of the 2023 Asian Cup, due to be played in January 2024. This episode is looking at the players of Indonesia. Here we go. And welcome to the International Soccer Preview by Soccer Files Canada. I'm Kevin, and this is Series 19 on the players of the 2023 Asian Cup, played in 2024. This episode covers Indonesia's players. So we're doing this mediacast in two parts. Part one here is a look at the candidates for the squad and their likelihood of making it. We think we went into too much detail in previous player mediacasts we've done, so we're aiming for a lighter, more listener-friendly kind of narrative version this time. Part two will come out when the squad lists are released and the final squad is selected. We think that'll be in late December or early January, and at that time we'll go back over the list that we compile at this time and see who made it and who didn't. And we'll also cover a couple of other things like injuries and so on. So we'll talk more about that at the end. We have made a separate video on what we will be covering over the next 9 months. YouTube watchers can see the link to that on the screen, and it can also be found in the show notes for both watchers and listeners. In short, we're focused on the Asian and African Cups, both taking place in early 2024. And we have also started our coverage of the 2026 World Cup qualifying. So this episode has 3 sections. In section 1, we give and discuss some general information on the team. Section 2 is the main part, where we look at the main candidates in each position and try to determine their likelihood of making the final squad. And section 3, just a short ending where we give any closing thoughts and preview part 2 in more detail. Let's begin then. And we start with some general comments or some general observations. So on the surface of it, Indonesia doesn't have a lot of experience. The most capped player is 34-year-old Arianto. He has 57 caps. But it's a big drop down from there, down to the 30s. So there are 6 players with 30 to 36 caps, and then just 4 players numbering in the 20s. It's all below 20 caps for all of the other players. The other thing is, compared to some of the teams we've done recently, Indonesia is fairly straightforward. They have brought in a few new players recently, but mostly it's the same cast of characters over the last 2 years, and particularly since June 2022. So it looks like a fairly stable squad going in at this point. Next, we look at any retirements, and really just one for Indonesia, and that's Evan Dimas. He was the captain from 2020 to 2022, and he was with the team from 2014 with 44 caps and 10 goals. Well, I mean, we're calling him a retirement, but really he's off the team because he's only 28 years old. But he did last play for the team in January 2022. So whatever happened there, he seems not to be part of the plans this time. Let's take a look at the main domestic clubs that the players are coming from. And we have 4 for you here. So Persija Jakarta is the first one. The second is PSM Makassar. Next we have Bayangkara. And finally Borneo Samarinda. Those are the most represented teams from Indonesia on the national team. When we look outside of the country, in the region, so kind of in the Asian region, we have Malaysia, South Korea, and Japan represented. They also have some players with European countries. These tend to be northern European countries. I mean, we know the historical connection that they have with the Netherlands, because the Indonesia used to be called the Dutch East Indies, and we're going to look at one team they seem to have a particular connection with there. But Netherlands, Belgium, Norway, and England, they have players in all of those countries. And finally, we look at maybe some of the big teams, or the big names the bigger names that they're associated with. So we have one player in Korea with the Jeonnam Dragons. That's one of the a fairly big team in the Asian region, and Tokyo Verde in Japan there. And the team I mentioned with the Netherlands, their association with was Utrecht. So I think there's just one player on the squad right now, but they have had players, several players go through the Utrecht youth system and team. And finally, we have one player in England with Ipswich. So there are other players in Belgium and Norway, but tend to be smaller teams. Okay, let's take a look at their recent games. So when we look at the players, their participation, and decide how likely they are to make the squad, we're looking kind of at their last 2 years of participation. And so these are the games that they've played over the past 2 years. So beginning at the beginning of 2022, they had 2 friendlies in January 2022. Both of those were with the nearby East Timor. And they had one in June 2022 with Bangladesh. We're not really concerned with the results of these. Actually, we'll be more concerned with the formations that they use in the next section. In June of 2022, they had Asian Cup qualifiers. So the final round of qualifying for this tournament that we're focused on, that was 3 games in June 2022. And those were with Kuwait, Jordan, and Nepal. After that, they had some friendlies. 2 of them in September. Both of those were with Curacao in the Caribbean there. In October and November, though, while most teams were playing games, they did not have any games in October or November 2022. A bit surprising. Next was the AFF Cup, or the ASEAN Cup. That is the regional cup for Southeast Asia, and that was actually a 4-team group stage, and then the finals, which are played in a home and away format. That was at the end of the December, so 3 of those group stage matches were in December. And these were Southeast Asian teams: Cambodia, Brunei, and Thailand. And then the last of those games was in January 2023. That was against the Philippines. And they did pass that group stage and met Vietnam in the quarterfinals. And they played Vietnam home and away, and they lost that. So that was the end of that tournament for them. So 6 games there over the turn of the year. Now we're in 2023, and it's friendlies. 2 friendlies in March 2023, both of them against Burundi. 2 friendlies in June against Palestine and Argentina. And 1 in September of 2023, that was against Turkmenistan. World Cup qualifying began in Asia in October 2023. That was a preliminary round, but Indonesia was required to play in that preliminary round, so they were in the basket of teams at the bottom in Asia. So I think it was the bottom 20 teams or so. Yes, the bottom 20 teams that had to undergo that round. So that began in October, and they were paired with Brunei. We actually did do a preview media cast on these sets of games. Gave us a good chance to look at weak teams like Brunei, who are rarely looked at because they get knocked out quickly. Brunei did get knocked out quickly. Indonesia won those games. And so in November, which we'll look at shortly, they move on to the next round of World Cup qualifying. But again, we're more concerned about the formations here in this Players podcast. So let's try to look at some patterns in the formation. So the usual formation for most of the period we just covered was the 4-2-1-3. But only about half the time. They did experiment with various formations, and sometimes they did use three central defenders. So they had sometimes a 5-4-1 formation. That's three central defender with a right back and a left back, and that was usually against stronger teams. And they also used a 3-4-3, or actually a modified 3-4-3, a 3-2-2-2-1. So try to wrap your head around that. And that was used against weaker teams. So the key point there is three central defenders. However, they kind of abandoned that in recent formations, because in recent formations, more common has been a 4-4-2 and that 3-2-2-2-1, again, a modification of a 3-4-3 that we saw them use there. So they seem to be favoring that, although they probably will be meeting tougher teams in the cup and probably have a more defensive formation. So they last used the 4-2-3-1 that they had been using about half the time. Last used that in January of 2023. So now the default formation seems to be these two that I've just mentioned, a 4-4-2 and a 3-2-2-2-1. And these, as I said, have been against weaker teams. So when they played Argentina, again, they went with five at the back. And so we might see, I doubt we'll see that 3-2-2-2-1 formation against the stronger teams in the Asian Cup. Okay, the last part is where we look ahead to the games they have coming up. So we're doing this mediacast at the end of October here. And these games are coming up in November because Indonesia passed the preliminary round. They make it to the next round. And on November 16th, they face Iraq in Iraq, an away game. And actually, the other one is an away game too in the Philippines. So they start this group with two away games. And we think they'll be using their best players there. But again, for Indonesia, they haven't changed that much. So I think we're seeing, we have a fairly good idea of their starting lineup unless big changes are made. Pre-tournament friendlies, they don't have any scheduled yet, but we expect most teams to schedule at least one game. But we'll have to wait until maybe we might do an update on the teams podcast when we get closer to the cup. So if we do, we can see if they have any pre-tournament friendlies scheduled. Right, so that brings us to the end of part one. And now we move on to part two, a look at the candidates. And we begin with the manager. And we usually start with the outgoing manager of the team. But in the case of Indonesia, they've had the same manager since 2020. So we don't really see any point in talking about the outgoing manager. The manager of the team is South Korean Shin Tae-young. So he was a manager of South Korea in 2017 and 18 and actually took them through the World Cup, and in 2020 became manager of not only Indonesia's national team, but he took control of the under-20 and under-23 teams. So kind of a lot of the new players will have come through under him. So Shin Tae-young leading them through this tournament. All right, let's take a look at goalkeepers here. And as always, we're going to just start by naming the candidates, and then we'll go through and give a bit of information, especially on the ones that seem more likely. So all of the players' names here are in in grey, and that indicates that they haven't been through a tournament. And because Indonesia hasn't made a tournament for a while, all of their players are in light grey. So goalkeepers, we have two definite candidates. The first one is Nadio Argawinata, and the other one is Sarul Trishna. Sarul Trishna. Now, I'll just make a comment on their names because I think a lot of times Indonesian players kind of go by their first name. So perhaps Nadio Argawinata will be known as Nadio. But because I'm not dead sure, I'm just going to give the name and hopefully that'll be familiar. So actually, Siarul Fadil Trishna on some websites is called Fadil. So I'm a little worried about the names not being familiar here. Anyway, we're going to go with kind of their names as they're given. We have one likely candidate in Imando Ari, and then we have two possible but unlikely candidates. So we make a decision as to whether to put them on the list. With Muhammad Rivandi, we are going to put on the list, possible but unlikely, but we do think it's possible that he will come back into the squad. We have three candidates actually. The next one is Reza Arya Pratama. We're also putting him on the list. And the last one, Dafa Fascia, we're not going to put on the list. He was just called in for 2 bench appearances, but he wasn't selected for the last 5 games. So we don't think there's really a chance of him making it back in. Okay, let's look at the candidates and then we'll finish the section with a little narrative on the position. So Nadio Argawinata started 15 of their 22 games over the past 2 years, and he was on the bench for 5. And that just means 2 games that he wasn't selected for. So not only do we think he is the definite candidate, but we think he'll be the starter too. Next, we have Sarul Fadil Trishna, and he started 5 of their 22 games over the past 2 years. He was subbed in for 1 and on the bench for 15. So the only game he was not selected for, just 1 game when he was out with coronavirus. So in other words, he seems to be selected all the time. Sarul Fadil Trishna, so 2 definite candidates. Next, we have Imando Ari, and he's been with Indonesia since 2021 and is 21 years old. And he returned actually after an 18-month absence. He was injured for half the time he was absent, returned in June 2023 and started 2 of the remaining 5 games and was on the bench for 2 and with the under-23 team for 1. So making a bit of a comeback there, Imando Ari. So we consider him a likely candidate. All of these players, by the way, play in Indonesia, and we'll kind of only point out the club if there's something specific to mention about it, like if they play abroad. Okay, we didn't talk about the 2 possible but unlikely candidates, so I'll just fill that in. Muhammad Rianda came back from an absence, a 9-month absence, but then he got injured and he wasn't selected for the last 3 matches. So he was injured for 4 and then not selected for 3. So he seems to be off the team now. But there is a chance he'll come back. The other one is Reza Pratama, and he got his first appearance in June 2023 and appeared on the bench 3 times, but not selected for the last 2 matches. So both of these guys are recent enough that there is a chance they'll be called back in. But part of the reason we think they're unlikely is that the 3 at the top seem quite entrenched in their positions. So Argawinata is the main starter, and for most of the period, his backup was Sarul Fadil Trishna. However, recently, Imando Ari has been making a bid as the second string keeper. So a bit of competition there, but we think those will be the 3 selected for the cup. Okay, let's move on to defenders, and we are going to talk about central defenders. We have three definite candidates here. The first one is Rizky Rido, and the second is Fashruddin Arianto. We mentioned him as the most capped player on the squad. He was captain in 2022 and 23, but isn't right now. The third definite candidate is Jordi Amat. And we have a likely candidate in Elkan Bagot. And we have four possible candidates. The first one is Wayu Presetio. Secondly, Andy Setio. Third, Hansuma Yama, or Hansuma Yama Pranata. And the last one, Alfiandra Dewanga. Okay, and we do have one possible but unlikely candidate. We won't post him because he last appeared in March, Mohamed Ferrari, a young player. We may see him a bit more in the future. Okay, let's look at the candidates here. Beginning with Rizky Rido. So he has been with the team since 2021. He's just 22 years old, but he has 26 caps and 3 goals. And he started 15 of their games over the last 2 years, subbed in for 2 and on the bench for 2. And then for various other reasons, not selected for 4, but actually only twice was he not selected to the squad, and those were the first 2 games of 2022. So a definite candidate, Rizky Rido. Also always called up is Fashruddin Arianto. So again, the most experienced player on the squad. Been with Indonesia since 2012 and has 56 caps and 4 goals. His age is a bit of a concern. He's 34 years old, but it looks like defenders can get away with it a little bit more. So Fashruddin Arianto started 13 of their 22 games over the last 2 years, and he was on the bench for the 9 others. So not necessarily a starter, but always called up to the squad. Thirdly, we have Jordi Amat, and Jordi Amat has been with the team since 2022. He has 9 caps and 1 goal, and he's 31 years old. He does have experience outside of Indonesia. In fact, he never has played in Indonesia, it seems. He's currently with a team in Malaysia, but he's played in Belgium, Rayo Vallecano in Spain, and Swansea in England. There, so pretty experienced in terms of his club experience. Jordi Amat got his first cap in December 2022 and then started 9 of their remaining 13 games. And he was on the bench for 2 and suspended for 1. But a bit of a concern in that he was injured for the last 2 matches there. So whether that injury will extend into the Asian Cup, we'll have to wait until the update podcast to get further word on that. The likely candidate is Elkan Bagot, and he's been with the team since 2021, 18 caps and 2 goals, and he's just 21 years old. He's the player who plays for Ipswich in England. He was raised in England, so all of his clubs have been in England. Interestingly, he was born in Thailand, so kind of a very international player. Elkan Bagot started 11 of their 22 games over the past 2 years. He was subbed in for 1 with the under-23 team for 1 and not selected for 9 others. But that includes the last match, which is a bit of a concern. However, the only 8 others were the ASEAN or the AFF Cup championship. So I think it's because he was playing in England that he wouldn't have played that tournament in December and January. So understandable. So otherwise, Elkan Bagot might be a definite candidate, but a bit of a concern that he missed the last game. However, we have him likely here. let's look at our four possible candidates. So Wayu Prasetyo. He got his first cap in September 2022 and didn't start any games, but was on the bench for two. Sorry, that should be September 2023. Didn't start any of the remaining three games, but was on the bench for two of them. So he's brand new, and he got two sub appearances after first coming in. The other ones are all kind of outgoing players. So Andy Setcho returned after a 2-year absence in June of 2023. He also didn't start any games. He was subbed in for one, on the bench for two, but then not selected for the last two matches. So it looks like they're looking for more central defenders to firm up the bench. And it looks like Andy Setcho kind of was tried out and failed, but we'll see if he shows up in the November games. Same with the next two candidates. Hansuma Yama came back after a more than 3-year absence. He started one of their remaining 11 games. This was after December 2022. And he was on the bench for 7, but then not selected for the last 3 matches. So it looked like he was getting a good look at, Hansumu Yama, but then ultimately not chosen. Again, we'll have to see. And finally, Alfiandra Dawanga, more of a veteran. He's got 15 caps since his first in 2021. He's 22 years old, and he played regularly in 2021 and in early 2022, but then was off the team for a year. That included an injury, but wasn't injured that whole time. He returned in September 2023 and started one of their 3 games, but then he wasn't selected for the October games. So a little difficult to tell. I think I am going to move him up the list to second place on the list because that's where he seems to me in terms of likelihood. But there we have a bit of confusion. But overall, it looks like they're searching for more central defenders because teams usually bring 5 or 6. And they have 4 likely or definite candidates, but we'll probably need a couple more. So I wouldn't be surprised to see a new name in November. Okay, let's move on to left backs. Oh no, we got to summarize the position of central defender. So as we said in the formation section, sometimes it's 2 central defenders and sometimes 3. And basically it's a rotation of these 4 definite or likely players we mentioned. So Rido, Arianto, Amat, and Bagat. And actually Bagat has been favored over Arianto in recent games. And sometimes right backs or left backs do come into the position when it's a 3-man defense, but actually that's quite rare. So it's really these 4 players. So all that we said about the possible candidates is really just looking for substitutes to strengthen the bench. All right, let's talk about left backs and introduce the candidates. So we have definite candidate Pratama Arhan. And likely candidate Ido Febrian Saya. And we have a possible candidate in Shane Patinama. And we will post the name of the possible but unlikely candidate, Jans Seuri. And we will actually talk about him because he's significant enough to merit it. Okay, Pratama Arhan, our definite candidate. He is the player who plays for Tokyo Verdy in Japan. He's been with Indonesia since 2021, and he has an impressive 35 caps. He's just 22 years old. So over the last 2 years, he started 16 of their 22 games, and he was subbed in for 5 besides. So a definite candidate there in Pratama Arhan. Ido Febrian Saya, he started only 4 of their 22 games over the last 2 years, but he was subbed in for 5 and on the bench for 10. So that's just 3 matches that he wasn't selected for. And he is a likely candidate to make the squad, although not so likely to be a starter. He's more of a substitute. Shane Patinama has been with the team just since 2023 here with 4 caps and 1 goal. He's 22 years old, and he played for Viking in Norway, but went through that system with the young Utrecht team there, Jong Utrecht, and he got his first cap for Indonesia in March of 2023 and started 2 of their remaining 5 games. He was subbed in for 1 and on the bench for 1, and then not selected for 1. So he's new since June, but selected for 4 out of 5 games. So Shane Patinama, a possible candidate there. And finally, we have Jan Sayuri. So he got his first cap in March of 2023. He started 1 of their 6 games, was on the bench for 3, but then not selected for the last 3 matches. So basically, he joined in March, but then fell off little by little and not selected. So we have Jan Sayuri as possible, but unlikely. And as you can see, they have 3 candidates here, and usually they bring 2 or 3 to the cup. So let's talk about the left back position then in summary. So the position sometimes becomes a left winger. And when it does, it's always the left back who plays the position. So for most of the period, it's been Pratama Arhan with Febrian Sia as the backup. However, it's the starts have been a bit more mixed lately. In other words, it's not as consistently Arhan as it was in the first part of the period. Arhan, Febrian Sia, and newcomer Shane Patinama have each started 2 of the last 6 games. So whether they're thinking of a change as the starting left back, or whether they're just giving those players a bit more field time, we'll have to see. Okay, let's move on to right back, and here we just have 2 candidates. The first one is definite candidate Asnawi Manko Alam, and he's actually the one who's taken over as the captain since 2023. Asnawi Manko Alam. And then Sandy Walsh as a possible candidate. So let's take a look at these guys. Asnawa Manko Alam is the one who plays in South Korea with the Jeonnam Dragons there, and he started 4 of their 22 games over the past 2 years. He was subbed in for 4 and on the bench for 2. So just 2 matches that he wasn't selected for. Asnawi Manko Alam, a definite candidate. Sandy Walsh is the other, and he's been with the team since recently, even though he is 28 years old. He got his first appearance on the bench in June of 2023, and he started 3 of their remaining 5 games, having been on the bench for the first 2 of those matches. So he's being used increasingly, and I believe he played as a defensive midfielder once there. So, but he was, and he also played as a central defender in the 3-man backline once also. So a bit of a roving player, it seems. He actually plays for KV Mechelen in Belgium, does Sandy Walsh. Okay, so let's finish with a summary of the right back position. So again, just like on the left, the position sometimes becomes the right winger. And when it does, in this case, it's not always the left back who plays it, but usually is. Manko Alam is in the right back position about 2/3 of the time. We saw he started 14 of the 22 games. But when it's not Manko Alam, it's usually an out of position player. So we saw the left back Sayuri Jan Sayuri has played in this position. The central defender, or we put him as defensive midfielder Irianto, who will meet soon, or attacking midfielder Kambuaya. So only recently, I think Walsh played there in one of the games, maybe two of the games, but it looks like perhaps they found what they're looking for in Sandy Walsh, which is a reliable backup to Manku Allen. Okay, those are the positions in the defense. We can move on to the midfield. And actually, we begin with the defensive midfielder, but only one candidate there. And even he is not coded as a defensive midfielder. It's Rashmat Irianto. And since he's the only candidate here, I can launch into talking about him. He's been with the team since 2021 and has 30 caps. He's 24 years old. And he started 13 of their 22 games over the past 2 years and subbed in for 2 and was on the bench for 7 others. So he's always called up, even if he only starts about half the games. And even though he's coded as a central defender, we've moved him to defensive midfield here because that's where he's been playing over the past 2 years. I think I saw him once as a central defender and otherwise in the midfield. Before we summarize that position, we're going to look at the central midfielders, and we have 2 definite candidates. The first is Mark Clock. Mark Clock, and the second is Ricky Kambuaya, who we mentioned as playing as a right back in one game. We have 2 possible candidates in Ivar Jenner. Ivar Jenner and Sharian Abimanyu. And then we have one possible but unlikely candidate, but we will post his name. And I'll just deal with him right now. That's Adam Alice. And he's been on and off the team, but mostly off the team. He returned after an absence in September, but then wasn't selected in October. So we think he's kind of unlikely. And then seems to be off the team or possibly retired. The player we mentioned as the only kind of retirement, Evan Dimas, unlikely to make a comeback because he's been gone since January 2022, even though he's young enough. He's just 28 years old. Okay, let's look at the candidates. We begin with Mark Clock, and he has been with the team since 2022, 18 caps and 4 goals, which is pretty good for a central defender. He's another one who came through that Utrecht youth system, and he also played for teams in Scotland, Bulgaria, and England, but now is playing in Indonesia. Mark Clock got his first cap in June 2022 and started 16 of the remaining 19 games. And he was subbed in for 1 and on the bench for 2 others. So always called up and almost always a starter is Mark Clock. The other definite candidate is Ricky Kambuaya. He's actually coded as an attacking midfielder, but we moved him to here because that's where he's been playing, more as a central midfielder. And he has been with the team, Ricky Kambuaya, since 2021, and he has 30 caps and 5 goals. So maybe he has played as an attacking midfielder more in the past because he does get goals. Over the past 2 years, he started 15 of their 22 games, and he was subbed in for, on the bench for 2, and just 1 match that he wasn't selected for. So Ricky Kambuaya, a definite candidate. We move now down to possible candidates. And Ivar Jenner, we're kind of between possible and possible but unlikely. He's been with the team just since this year. He has 2 caps and is 19 years old. So he got his first cap in June of 2023 and started 1 of their remaining 5 games. He was subbed in for 2 Sorry, subbed in for one. But over the last three games, he was with the under-23 team for one game and not selected for the last two. So uh, Ivar Jenna, we put him as a possible candidate. By the way, he's another player who has Dutch connections. He was born in the Netherlands and also came through that Young Utrecht and Utrecht path, Ivar Jenner. The other possible candidate is Sharian Abumanu, and he started one of their 2020 he started one of their 22 games over the past 2 years, subbed in for three and was on the bench for 11. However, he was not selected for the last 5 matches, so he was a regular, at least on the bench, and then not selected for the last 5 matches. We've seen that in other teams, not so much with Indonesia. I'm not sure what it represents, but we're never sure where to put them. But we put him as a possible candidate here, Sharian Abumanu. Okay, and we talked about the possible but unlikely candidate, Adam Alice. So we can summarize now the position, and we've combined defensive and central midfielders into one. So think kind of at the top of the box in the center of the field. So again, usually it's two players there, but sometimes it's one. Kind of one central defender in a three-man midfield. So you have a right and left midfielder. But focusing on the center, it is Clock, Irianto, and Kambuaya rotating in that position. So usually it's two, or else those guys will play as the right and left midfielders in the three-man midfield, which we'll talk about shortly. Well, we'll talk about it right now, as a matter of fact. Because we don't have any players coded as left midfielder or right midfielder, and so we'll just kind of summarize the positions. So really we're talking about these positions when it's a three-man midfield, and so these players will often be the central midfielders when it's a three-man midfield. But we have seen other players brought in. I was right, Walsh, the right defender Walsh, recently played in this position. Also attacking midfielder Ferdinand, and central midfielder Jenner. Well, all of these players, central midfielders, sometimes coming in as the right or left midfielder. Okay. Let's move on to the left winger. So now we're kind of moving upfield, and we could be talking about anything from left wing to left attacking midfielder, even up to left forward, if that's played by one of these players. And we did see that a lot of times it is the left defender moving up to this position. So when this is a winger position, it's only the case when there's a left back and a left winger, or a right back and a right winger, such as in a 4-4-2 formation. Okay, let's look at the candidates on the left upper quadrant of the field, or left wingers. And we've actually moved a player who's coded as a right winger over to here. That's Witan Sulaiman. And I know on some sources he's just known as Witan, as Indonesians tend to be, I think. Witan Sulaiman, a definite candidate. Sadil Ramdhani, also he is a likely candidate. We have Stefano Lillipali as a possible candidate, and possible candidate Donny Tree Pamungkas. So two possible candidates there. And let's take a look at them. So the first one, Witan Sulaiman, has been with the team since 2021, and he has 34 caps and 9 goals. So a bit of a scorer for them. He's just 22 years old, and he has started 9 of their 22 games over the last 2 years, and he was subbed in for 9 and with the under-23 team for one, not selected for 3 matches. So we think he's a definite candidate. He did spend a bit of time in Eastern Europe there with Lechia Gdansk, actually a fairly good big team in Poland there, and Seneca in Slovakia, as well as Serbia. So a bit of experience there. He's always selected, but as we saw, starts only half of the game. He's actually quite versatile. We put him as a left winger here because that is kind of the position he started the most, but that would be 50% at most, because he plays also on the right wing too, and sometimes central attacking midfielder, and we've even seen him as a centre forward. So Witan Suleiman, a fairly flexible player, or versatile player. Okay, the likely candidate, is Sadil Ramdani. He returned from an absence to play regularly, subbing in about a third of the time. So he plays right winger just as often as what he's coded as, which is a left winger. And he returned after a 2.5-year absence and started 10 of the remaining 19 games, as well as subbing in for 6 and on the bench for 1. So just 2 matches that he wasn't selected for after his return. That's Sadil Ramdani. So we see that Witan Suleiman and Sadil Ramdani often switch sides, is maybe the simplest way of putting it, with Suleiman playing in other positions besides. Our first possible candidate is Stefano Lillipali, and he returned after a more than 2.5-year absence himself. That was in June of 2022, and he started 4 of their remaining 19 games, subbed in for 2 and on the bench for 2. But there were 10 matches that he wasn't selected for, and that includes the last 2 matches. So Stefano Lillipali, born in the Netherlands, by the way, and also played for smaller teams in the Netherlands. So we think he's a possible candidate, along with Donny Tree Pamungas. And he does not have any caps for the national team, actually. He's just 18 years old, and he got his first appearance on the bench in March 2023. And didn't start any of the remaining 7 games, but he was on the bench for 3 of them, and then not selected for 4 others, including the last 2 matches. So actually I should probably move him down to possible, but unlikely. Maybe too young for this tournament, but we could see him in the future. I'll leave him as possible though. And let's summarize then the position of left wingers with a bit of a narrative. When it is a left winger, it's, as I said, a left defender or a left back moving up, unless in the rare case that it's a 4-4-2 where they have both a left back and a left winger. But more commonly, this position is a left attacking midfielder. And right winger Witan Suleiman often starts in the position just as often as Ramdani, and those two seem to hold the position down. Stefano Lillipali does appear there, but I've also seen him appear as a centre forward, actually. So I'm not sure he's really a consideration against these 2 players. Okay, let's move on to right wingers. And again, Witan Suleimani is coded as a right winger. But we've talked about him because he plays more on the left. For right winger names, we have, sorry, I lost my spot here. I'm just refinding it. We have Egi Maulana Vikri as a possible candidate, so just possible candidates over here. Jakob Sayuri and Zaki Ashraf, 3 possible candidates. And then 2 possible but unlikely candidates whose names we will mention but not post. So Rico Siman Tunjak, he returned after an absence, played 2 games in March 2023, and then was off the team again. And Ryan Kurnia got his first appearance in September 2023, on the bench, but then was not brought up for the October game. So we'll put those 2 players back on the list if they appear on the final roster. But let's look at the main candidates here. Well, the main candidates are, as we saw, Witan Suleiman and Sadio Ramdani, both of them playing on the left side as well as the right. So that's why we have only three possible candidates here. Egi Maulana Vikri has been with the team since 2018. He has 21 caps and 8 goals. He's 23 years old, and he is playing back in Indonesia now, but he was playing with the team in Slovakia recently. He started 7 of their 22 games over the past 2 years, subbed in for 3 and was on the bench for 2. But he was out with 2 separate injuries for 5 games and not selected for 5 games. So Egi Maulana Vikri plays various positions. Usually, though, he's in the middle as a central attacking midfielder and not so much on the right. Next candidate, Jakob Sayuri. He returned after a 15-month absence in September 2022 to start 8 of the remaining 5 games, and he was subbed in for 4. However, he was not selected for the last 3 matches. So he has also started in various positions too, and so I have seen him as a right attacking midfielder here, but I've also seen him, I think, on the left side or as a right forward. Okay, and the last candidate is Zaki Ashraf. He's just 20 years old, and got his first appearance in March of this year, 2023, and didn't start any games, but he was on the bench for 5 and not selected for 2 others. So probably a bit less likely than the others, but one never knows. So those are the 3 candidates. So again, summarizing the right wing position, it really is usually Suleiman or Ramdani, with these other 2 players maybe showing up there, Maulana Vikri and Jakob Sayuri there. And we move on to our forward line, which begins with attacking midfielders. And we have a definite candidate here in Marcelo Ferdinand, and a possible candidate in Akram Fikri, and a possible but unlikely candidate, but we will post his name, Muhammad Rafli, so we'll talk about him too. Okay, Marcelino Ferdinand, he's just 19 years old, but he has 14 caps and 2 goals, so he got his first start in January 2022, and he started 7 games and subbed in for 7 games. Couple of injuries, and with the under 23 team, all in all, he just missed or was only 2 matches that he wasn't selected for. And we've seen him in various positions, actually. We've seen him as a central midfielder, as a left winger, and as a right midfielder. So he's been regularly called up. However, he was injured in October 2023, and that is a hamstring injury, and they often take time to recover. So he is a doubt for this cup. We'll have to update that in our part 2 of this podcast. Perhaps brought in to replace him is Akram Fikri, because he got his first appearance on the bench in October of 2023 here. He didn't start either of the games, but he was subbed in for 1 and on the bench for the other. So perhaps he's been brought in as a possible replacement. And yes, the reason we'll talk about Muhammad Rafli again is because of this injury might get him recalled to the team. But he started 8 of their games over the last 2 years, subbed in for 1 and on the bench for 4, and not selected for 9 matches, including the last 7. But again, there's a chance that he will be brought in if Marcelino Ferdinand isn't able to make the squad. So let's summarize the position of attacking midfielder. Actually, they don't have this position in recent formations. When they did, though, it was Ferdinand a couple of times, Ferdinand. But more recently, the right winger we just mentioned, Maulana Vickery, or the somewhat ubiquitous Suleiman Witan, have all been seen kind of in the central attacking midfielder role. All right, we have no secondary strikers, no players coded as secondary strikers, so we move on to forwards, and we begin with Dendi Solistiawan. Dendi Solistiawan as a definite candidate, and three likely candidates. The first is Dimas Drajad or Dimas Dryad. I'm not sure how to pronounce that one. Next one is Hockey Karaka. And thirdly, Ramadan Sananta. Ramadan Sananta. And then we have one possible candidate in Raphael Struck. And then one possible but unlikely character who we'll just mention by name, Ali Kusuma. So he got a bench appearance in September 2023, but didn't appear in the October games. And finally, we have a player who's seemingly off the squad. His name is Elijah Spasojevic. We won't post his name either, but he does have an impressive record of 7 caps and 4 goals for the national team. However, he was not selected for the last 7 matches, and we consider him to be off the squad because he is 36 years old and hasn't played for a while. So again, we'll put him back on the list if he does make a comeback. But let's look at the more likely candidates. With the definite candidate, Dendi Solistiawan. So he got his first appearance on the bench in March 2017. Why am I mentioning that? Because he returned after a 5.5-year absence in September 2022 and started 10 of their remaining 15 games, as well as subbing in for the 5 others. So an interesting story there. Coming back after a 5.5-year absence, and he's a starter and a definite candidate. So he also has played as a left winger, or I should say a left attacking midfielder and a right attacking midfielder. I think that was one time each time, but usually he is the centre forward there, whether it's one or two, and we'll talk about that shortly. Next, we have likely candidate Dimas Dryad, I'll say, and he also has an impressive scoring record so far, 11 caps and 6 goals, so that's pretty good. And he got his first cap in June of 2022 and started 9 of the remaining 19 games, subbed in for 2 and on the bench for 1. However, he was injured for 6 matches. That's no problem. He's fit now. But he wasn't selected for the last match. So a minor concern there, but we still consider him a likely candidate. Our next likely candidate is Hockey Karaka. So he got his first cap in October 2023, that is. So he's brand new to the squad. And he started both of the remaining 2 games there. So brought in as a starter, Hockey Karaka. He's just 19 years old. So 2 caps and 2 goals. Good for him. He looks like a promising candidate there. Also likely is Ramadan Sananta. So he's been with the team since September 2022. He didn't start any of their remaining 15 games, though. He was subbed in for 6 and on the bench for 6. So that's just 3 matches that he was not on the squad for. And he also has an impressive record of 6 caps and 4 goals. And he's 21 years old. Ramadan Santanta, a likely candidate. We have a possible candidate in Raphael Struck, I think is how you pronounce it. And He was born in the Netherlands too. He actually came up through Den Haag, so Den Haag's youth system, and he's playing for their team right now. Rafael Struijk is 20 years old and got his first cap in June 2023, and he started 2 of the remaining 5 games and was on the bench for 1. And then with the under-23 team for 1 and not selected for 1. So it seems a little less likely than the other candidates, but quite possible, I would say. And when he plays, he tends to play as a left forward when they have more than 1 forward. So we've never seen him as the single centre forward. That's Rafael Struijk. Okay, well, we dealt with the other 2 players seemingly off the squad and possible but unlikely. So let's finish by describing the position. So usually there's 1 centre forward, sometimes 2, and sometimes even 3, although that's rare. They seemed to be struggling to find a centre forward in early 2022, and the players who played there in the first part of that period are no longer on the squad. So Triad was used regularly for a while, and he still is sometimes. But Sulis Jawan's return in September 22 seemed to immediately make him the main man. Recently, though, the position has been 2-man more often, and so it's shared. There's more players that can be used. So Struijk has come in on the left, and newcomer Karaka started both October games. So, I mean, they may go with more forwards now that they have a bit more to choose from. All of these guys doing well, putting the ball in the net. So pretty exciting stuff in Indonesia's offense. And maybe that would be my first comment, my first closing thought, is that I would say over the last year and a half, they've definitely improved the forward line, kind of gotten rid of the guys who were there before and brought in new players who can score. We'd have to analyze if they're getting most of their goals against weak teams, which I suspect they are. But nevertheless, they are putting the ball in the net, which could make them a better team. I don't think I have anything more to say about that other than repeating the thoughts at the beginning that it's a pretty stable squad without too many changes, although we do see that pattern of regular players being dropped for the last 6 games and new players coming in, but not so much with Indonesia as with a couple of other teams we've looked at. Okay, let's look on to preview part 2, and we will be making note of any notable non-selections. That would be players who were likely or definite here that didn't make the squad, and then any surprise inclusions that would be possible but unlikely players here, or perhaps players that we have on our list that we just thought were no longer a consideration, who do come back into the team kind of out of the cold. And finally, we'll look at any new players. That would be players who haven't been capped yet, but maybe they're hot in their club action and are brought into the national team for the tournament. We'll also give an update on injuries. So we had a couple here. That will require an update, and then any new ones that come around. So that'll be an important part of the part 2 of this mediacast. We originally planned to tag on our past, present, and future plans for the mediacast, but we have instead decided to put a link to that 10-minute video in the show notes. It covers what we're working on and what we plan to do over the next 9 months. We'd like to thank Naber Abacham and Pixabay for the wonderful music you hear in this mediacast. The title is called Arabic Trap.